The valley was unusually quiet that morning. Sarah Mitchell, a retired nurse who had settled into the countryside to escape her past, was out on her usual walk along the stream. As she rounded a bend, something caught her eye, a small, motionless figure lying in the mud. It was a foal, struggling to breathe, and beside it stood a mare. The mare, later known as Aurora, paced protectively, nostrils flaring and eyes wide with fear. The urgency in the animal's movements made Sarah's heart race. Sarah stopped, her instincts taking over. The foal looked dangerously weak, its breaths shallow and irregular. But approaching wasn't going to be easy. Aurora's sharp whinny cut through the stillness, a clear warning to stay back. Sarah raised her hands, speaking in a soft, steady voice. "Easy, girl. I'm not here to hurt you." Every step was cautious, deliberate, as she pulled a water bottle from her backpack and waited. Aurora's eyes never left her, distrust evident in every tense muscle. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, the mare's restless pacing slowed. Taking the chance, Sarah inched forward until she was close enough to touch the foal. Its body was icy cold, frighteningly light, as if life was slipping away with each breath. Gently, she lifted it into her arms. Aurora let out a loud, angry neigh, stepping closer, but stopped just short of attacking. "I've got him," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to the anxious mare. "I'll help him." Wading through the shallow stream, Sarah could feel the icy water seeping into her boots. Aurora followed closely, her eyes locked on Sarah and the foal. But as they reached the other side, a distant rumble echoed through the valley, hoofbeats growing louder by the second. Aurora froze, ears perked and alert. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She turned, scanning the open fields, but nothing was in sight. Then the sound intensified. Aurora's head snapped toward the noise, and she let out a sharp, urgent neigh, as if signaling or warning. Sarah clutched the foal tighter, a chill creeping down her spine. Was it Aurora's herd? Predators? The air was thick with tension, the kind that precedes something inevitable. Sarah knew, deep down, that whatever was coming would change everything. And what about you? Have you hit the like button and subscribed to the channel yet? That simple action helps us keep bringing you emotional stories like this one. Don't miss the next chapter of this incredible journey. Now, let's get back to the story and see what happens next. The hoofbeats grew louder, their steady rhythm echoing like thunder across the valley. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding as she clutched the frail foal closer to her chest. Aurora let out another sharp neigh, her body rigid, ears pinned back as though ready to charge. The sound was coming from behind the distant hills, hidden from view. Whatever was approaching, it was fast, and getting closer. "Easy, girl," Sarah murmured, more to calm herself than the mare. The foal stirred faintly in her arms, its trembling growing weaker by the second. There was no time to think about the growing noise or what it might mean. Sarah had to get the foal to safety. Turning her back on the direction of the sound, she started walking, her boots sinking into the muddy earth. Aurora stayed close, her movements hesitant, as though torn between following Sarah and turning back toward the unseen threat. The path ahead was uneven and slippery, the rain from the night before leaving deep puddles and patches of slick mud. Sarah stumbled once, nearly falling, but kept her grip on the foal. The mare's sharp, distressed snorts cut through the air behind her. Aurora kept stopping, looking back toward the growing rumble. Sarah's nerves were fraying. What if the sound wasn't a herd at all? What if it was something dangerous? A predator? A stampede? She didn't want to find out. As the trail curved, a shadow passed over the valley. Sarah turned her head instinctively, her breath catching as the first figure came into view. A lone horse, galloping hard and fast, its mane whipping in the wind. Behind it, several more appeared, their pace relentless. Aurora froze, her muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. Her piercing neigh sliced through the tension, and for a moment, everything stopped. The leading horse slowed just enough to lock eyes with Aurora before breaking into another full-speed charge. "Is this your herd?" Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. But something felt off. These horses didn't move with the calm, collected order of a herd reuniting. Their movements were frantic, as though they were running from something or toward it. Aurora's body language didn't suggest relief, it screamed unease. She stepped protectively in front of Sarah and the foal, her posture a warning. Sarah's skin prickled as she realized that Aurora wasn't just watching the oncoming horses, she was preparing to defend. The ground began to tremble under Sarah's feet as the approaching group closed the distance. The air was electric, charged with an intensity that made Sarah's breath hitch. Her arms tightened around the foal, its faint heartbeat pressing against her chest. She glanced at Aurora, whose fierce gaze was fixed on the charging horses. Whatever was about to happen, Sarah knew she was caught in the middle of it, and it was far from over. The herd thundered closer, their hoofbeats shaking the ground beneath Sarah's feet. Aurora stepped forward, her body tense, a fierce determination radiating from her as though she were bracing for battle. Sarah's pulse raced as she held the foal tightly, her mind torn between running for cover and staying rooted in place. The oncoming horses were wild, manes whipping in the wind, eyes wide with fear, and movements so chaotic that it was clear something had driven them to this desperate sprint. Aurora let out a long, piercing neigh, and for a moment the lead horse faltered. It slowed just enough to glance at Aurora, its ears flicking back in hesitation. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was Aurora's herd, after all. But the hope faded as quickly as it came. The lead horse suddenly reared, whinnying loudly, and the others followed suit. Their panic was palpable, their erratic movements filling the valley with a sense of danger. Whatever had spooked them wasn't far behind. Sarah backed up instinctively, her boots slipping in the mud as she tried to keep her balance. "What's going on?" she whispered to herself, glancing over her shoulder for an escape route. Aurora stood her ground, her ears pinned back and her tail swishing angrily. It wasn't fear in the mare's posture anymore, it was defiance. Sarah could feel the tension radiating from her as if the mare knew exactly what was coming. Suddenly, the herd split in two, parting like a wave to avoid Sarah and Aurora. The sound of their hooves was deafening, the sheer force of their presence making the ground beneath Sarah vibrate. She crouched instinctively, shielding the foal as the wild horses thundered past her on both sides. The rush of wind from their movements whipped her hair across her face, and the metallic tang of fear filled the air. The herd wasn't attacking, but their panic was enough to make Sarah's hands tremble as she clutched the foal tighter. As the last of the horses sprinted by, Sarah thought the chaos had passed. But she was wrong. From behind the herd came a new sound, deeper and more menacing. A guttural growl echoed across the valley, low and resonant, sending shivers down her spine. Aurora's head snapped toward the source, and she let out a sharp warning neigh. Sarah's heart sank as she realized what the horses had been fleeing from. Somewhere behind the ridge, a predator lurked, hidden but closing in fast. The tension was unbearable. Sarah looked at Aurora, who was now pawing at the ground, her eyes blazing with resolve. "We need to move," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking as she cradled the foal and began to back away. But Aurora didn't follow. Instead, the mare turned to face the ridge, her posture bold and unyielding. Sarah froze, panic rising in her chest. Was Aurora planning to fight? Whatever was coming wasn't just a threat to Aurora or the herd, it was coming for all of them. The growl echoed again, low and guttural, reverberating through the valley like a warning. Sarah's breath hitched, and her grip on the foal tightened. Her mind screamed for her to run, but her feet felt rooted to the spot as she stared toward the ridge. Aurora stood firm, her ears pinned back, nostrils flaring as she released a defiant neigh. The mare's body was tense, every muscle coiled as though she were preparing for a fight. The predator remained hidden, but its presence felt suffocating, an invisible threat closing in with each passing second. "Aurora, come on," Sarah urged, her voice breaking with desperation. She took a shaky step back, her boots slipping slightly in the mud. The foal stirred faintly in her arms, its fragile heartbeat a constant reminder of how little time they had. Aurora, however, didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the ridge, unwavering. Sarah's chest tightened. She couldn't leave without the mare, not after everything they had already been through. Then, a figure emerged at the top of the ridge. At first, it was just a shadow, indistinct and shifting. But as it moved closer, Sarah's stomach dropped. It was a mountain lion, its golden coat blending eerily with the rocky terrain. The predator's movements were slow and deliberate, its eyes locked on the group below. It was thin, almost gaunt, its ribs visible beneath its fur, but its hunger made it no less dangerous. The lion paused, crouching low as it prepared to strike. Aurora stamped her hoof and released a sharp, shrill whinny that echoed across the valley. The mountain lion froze, its ears twitching in response. For a brief moment, the predator seemed to reconsider, its sharp eyes flicking between Aurora and the foal in Sarah's arms. But then its muscles tensed again, a clear sign it was readying to pounce. Sarah's pulse raced. Her options were rapidly shrinking, and she could feel panic clawing at her resolve. "I can't let this happen," Sarah whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. She looked around frantically, searching for something, anything, that could be used as a weapon. Her eyes fell on a fallen branch nearby, thick and heavy enough to serve as a makeshift club. Carefully, she shifted the foal in her arms and reached for it, her fingers closing around the ruff wood just as the lion crept a step closer. Aurora suddenly lunged forward, her hooves striking the ground with a force that made Sarah flinch. The mare let out another piercing neigh, her posture radiating defiance. The mountain lion hesitated again, its tail twitching as if it were weighing its chances. Sarah's hands tightened around the branch, her body trembling. "Come on, Aurora," she murmured under her breath. "We have to get out of here. Please." But Aurora didn't retreat. Instead, the mare held her ground, as if silently vowing to protect Sarah and the foal, no matter the cost. The mountain lion's gaze didn't waver. Its golden eyes locked onto the foal in Sarah's arms, its body coiled like a spring ready to explode. Aurora pawed at the ground furiously, her loud, shrill neighs cutting through the tense silence of the valley. Sarah's knuckles turned white as she gripped the branch, her breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps. The predator moved closer, its movements slow and calculated, each step a deliberate show of dominance. Sarah could feel the weight of the foal in her arms and knew she couldn't run, not with the foal so weak and Aurora standing her ground. Aurora took another step forward, her muscular frame blocking Sarah and the foal from the predator's line of sight. The mare's tail swished violently, her ears pinned back in unmistakable warning. But the mountain lion wasn't deterred. Its hunger overpowered any sense of caution, and it crept closer, its claws raking softly against the dirt. Sarah's heart felt like it would explode as the space between predator and defender grew smaller. Without warning, the lion lunged. Its powerful body leaped through the air, claws outstretched toward Aurora. The mare reacted with lightning speed, rearing onto her hind legs and slamming her front hooves down with terrifying force. The lion twisted midair, narrowly avoiding the strike, landing mere feet from Aurora. It let out a snarl, low and menacing, and swiped a paw at the mare. Aurora dodged to the side, her muscles rippling with adrenaline, and struck again, her hoof grazing the lion's shoulder. "Stop! Stop!" Sarah yelled, though her voice felt futile against the chaos unfolding in front of her. She backed up a few more steps, the foal's weak body trembling in her arms. Her mind raced as she tried to figure out what to do. She had never been this close to such raw danger, and the realization that Aurora was risking her life to protect them filled Sarah with equal parts gratitude and terror. The lion crouched again, preparing for another attack. Aurora didn't wait this time. She charged forward with a deafening roar of her own, her hooves striking the ground with an earth-shaking force. The lion hesitated, momentarily thrown off by the mare's aggression. But it didn't retreat. Instead, it darted to the side, circling Aurora, its eyes still locked on the foal. Sarah's grip on the branch tightened as she realized what was happening. The lion was trying to outmaneuver Aurora, to find a way past her. "No, you don't," Sarah muttered, her voice trembling but resolute. As the lion edged closer to her, Sarah raised the branch above her head and swung with all her strength. The wood cracked against the ground just inches from the lion's paws, and the predator stopped, startled by the sudden motion. It snarled, its sharp teeth bared, and Sarah felt her entire body shaking. Aurora seized the opportunity, rearing up once more and letting out another ferocious neigh, forcing the lion to retreat a few steps. The standoff wasn't over, but for the first time, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. They had a chance, if they worked together. Would you have the courage to face such a tense moment like this? Aurora's bravery and Sarah's determination are truly inspiring. Let us know, what would you do in her place to protect the little foal? The air was thick with tension, the battle between Aurora and the mountain lion unfolding like a scene from a nightmare. The predator snarled, its sharp teeth gleaming in the dim light, while Aurora stomped the ground with a fury Sarah had never seen in an animal before. Each clash of hoof and claw sent a jolt of terror through Sarah's body, but she couldn't afford to freeze. The foal trembled weakly in her arms, its life dependent on what happened next. The mountain lion circled Aurora again, its movements calculated, its predatory instincts on full display. Aurora kept turning with it, refusing to let it near Sarah or the foal. The mare's protective instincts were fierce, but Sarah could see the toll the standoff was taking. Aurora's breaths were coming in sharp bursts, her powerful muscles trembling under the strain. The lion, thin and desperate, seemed to sense her weakening resolve and crouched lower, preparing for another attack. Sarah's grip on the branch tightened. She couldn't just stand there and watch Aurora fight alone. The lion's attention shifted momentarily to Sarah, its sharp eyes flicking toward the foal in her arms. It was a fleeting moment, but enough to make Sarah act. "Not today," she muttered under her breath, raising the branch high. As the lion lunged toward her, Sarah swung with every ounce of strength she could muster. The wood cracked against the ground inches from the lion's face, startling it enough to force it back a few steps. Aurora seized the moment. With a furious neigh, she charged forward, her hooves striking the ground like thunder. The mountain lion barely had time to react before Aurora reared up and came down hard, her hooves grazing the predator's side. The lion snarled in pain, leaping back to put distance between itself and the relentless mare. For a moment, the predator hesitated, its body tense, its eyes darting between Sarah and Aurora. It was calculating its odds, and for the first time, it seemed to waver. "Get out of here!" Sarah shouted, her voice shaking but forceful. She raised the branch again, stepping forward despite the fear coursing through her veins. The lion growled low, its tail lashing behind it, but it began to back away, its golden eyes narrowing. Aurora let out another sharp whinny, stamping her hoof as if daring the predator to try again. But the lion didn't. With a final snarl, it turned and bounded toward the ridge, disappearing over the crest as quickly as it had appeared. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, still clutching the foal tightly against her chest. Aurora stood nearby, her sides heaving with exhaustion, but her eyes remained locked on the ridge, as if ensuring the predator was truly gone. "You saved us," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Aurora turned her head toward Sarah, and for a brief moment their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever bond had formed in those tense moments was unbreakable now. The adrenaline still coursed through Sarah's body as she sat in the mud, holding the frail foal against her chest. Aurora stood nearby, her head high but her body trembling from the exertion of the fight. The valley was silent now, the echoes of the confrontation fading into nothingness. Sarah's breathing slowed, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every muscle in her body ached from the tension, yet relief flooded her veins. The predator was gone, for now. The foal stirred faintly, letting out a weak, pitiful sound that snapped Sarah back to reality. She carefully adjusted her hold, feeling the rapid but fragile heartbeat against her palms. "We're not out of this yet," she murmured to herself. Glancing at Aurora, she could see the mare's ears swiveling constantly, scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. Sarah could tell Aurora wasn't entirely convinced the threat had passed. "Come on," she said softly, rising to her feet. "We need to keep moving." Aurora followed as Sarah trudged forward, the foal cradled tightly in her arms. The trail ahead was uneven and slippery, the earlier rain leaving pools of water that reflected the gray sky above. Sarah's boots sank into the mud with every step, but she pressed on, knowing she had to find shelter soon. Aurora's steady presence at her side was both a comfort and a reminder of the weight of the responsibility she now carried. Every so often, Aurora would stop and glance back toward the ridge, her muscles tensing as if expecting the lion to return. As they reached a small grove of trees, Sarah paused to catch her breath. She carefully laid the foal on a patch of soft grass, kneeling beside him to check his condition. His breathing was still shallow, his body limp, but his eyes fluttered open briefly, a small spark of life that gave Sarah a sliver of hope. "You're a fighter," she whispered, brushing a bit of dirt from his matted coat. Aurora stood a few feet away, watching intently, her dark eyes filled with something Sarah could only describe as trust. Sarah rummaged through her backpack, pulling out the last of her water and a small syringe she always carried for emergencies. Carefully, she used it to drip water into the foal's mouth, watching as his throat moved faintly, swallowing small amounts. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She looked up at Aurora. "He's going to need more than this. If we can make it back to the barn, I can give him what he needs. But it's going to take both of us." Aurora let out a low whicker, her ears twitching forward. Sarah couldn't help but smile, despite the weight of the situation. She felt as though the mare understood her words, as though they were partners in this fragile battle for the foal's life. "All right," Sarah said, standing and lifting the foal once more. "Let's get him home." With Aurora by her side, Sarah set off again, the grove fading behind them. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the quiet valley held more secrets, and that the danger wasn't entirely gone. The weather began to shift as Sarah and Aurora pressed on. The soft gray clouds overhead thickened, and a biting wind swept through the valley, rattling the trees and sending chills through Sarah's already exhausted body. Every step was a struggle, her arms aching from holding the fragile foal. Aurora stayed close, her ears flicking at every sound, her posture tense as if she expected the mountain lion to reappear at any moment. The eerie stillness of the valley only heightened Sarah's anxiety. The foal's shallow breaths grew fainter with each passing minute, and Sarah's fear deepened. "Just a little longer," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You've made it this far. Don't give up on me now." She adjusted her grip on him, careful not to jostle his weak frame. The memory of his brief, fluttering attempt to open his eyes kept her moving, though her legs felt like lead. Aurora's presence, steady and unyielding, became a silent source of strength. They approached a narrow ravine, the path twisting sharply downward before disappearing into dense undergrowth. The rain began to fall in cold, sharp droplets, and the trail quickly turned slick with mud. Sarah hesitated, staring at the descent. It would be treacherous, especially with the foal in her arms. But there was no other way forward. She glanced at Aurora, who stood at the edge of the trail, snorting softly as if sensing Sarah's hesitation. "We have to do this," Sarah said, more to herself than to the mare. Carefully, Sarah began the descent, her boots sliding on the wet ground. Aurora followed closely, her movements sure and deliberate despite the mud. Halfway down, Sarah's foot slipped on a slick rock, and she stumbled forward. Her heart leaped into her throat as she fought to keep her balance, the foal pressed tightly against her chest. Aurora was instantly at her side, her presence grounding Sarah as she steadied herself. "Thanks, girl," Sarah murmured, her voice shaking. She took another step, this time more carefully. When they finally reached the bottom, the rain had intensified, soaking Sarah to the bone. She paused under the partial cover of a large oak tree, her breaths coming in gasps. Aurora stood beside her, her mane plastered to her neck, but her eyes remained sharp, scanning the horizon. The foal let out a faint, trembling whimper, and Sarah knew she couldn't afford to stop for long. She reached into her backpack, pulling out a blanket she had packed on a whim and wrapping it tightly around the foal. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Gathering her strength, Sarah stood and looked at Aurora. The mare met her gaze with a determination that seemed almost human. "Let's get him home," Sarah said softly. With the rain pouring harder and the wind howling around them, the two pressed on, their path winding through the ravine and into the shadow of the hills beyond. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching them, lingering just out of reach in the storm. The rain pounded relentlessly as Sarah pushed forward, her body aching with exhaustion. The barn was finally in sight, its silhouette barely visible through the downpour. Each step felt heavier than the last, her soaked boots slipping in the mud, but she refused to slow down. The foal's faint, uneven breaths against her chest were a constant reminder of how precious little time they had. Aurora kept pace beside her, the mare's ears twitching with unease as though she, too, could feel the weight of something looming just beyond the rain. Thunder cracked above them, loud and violent, and a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the valley for a split second. Sarah's breath hitched. She thought she saw movement in the distance, a shadow darting between the trees. Aurora froze, her head snapping up and her body tensing as a sharp neigh escaped her throat. "Not now," Sarah muttered, shaking her head and forcing herself to keep moving. Her instincts screamed at her to hurry, to get to the barn before whatever was out there revealed itself. The trail leading to the barn was slick and treacherous. Twice, Sarah stumbled, barely managing to keep her footing as she cradled the foal in her arms. Aurora let out a low, nervous snort, her hooves slipping in the mud but never faltering. The storm seemed almost alive, its howling winds pushing against them like a force determined to stop them. Every step felt like a gamble, the thought of falling, of dropping the foal, haunting Sarah's every move. When they finally reached the barn, Sarah nearly collapsed against the door, pushing it open with her shoulder. The old wooden structure creaked as they entered, the air inside heavy with the smell of hay and damp wood. Aurora followed closely, shaking the rain from her coat before stepping protectively in front of Sarah and the foal. Sarah knelt on the barn floor, carefully laying the foal down on a bed of straw. "We made it," she whispered, her voice trembling. The foal stirred faintly, its shallow breathing steady but weak. Aurora let out a sharp whinny, and Sarah's head snapped toward the open barn door. The storm raged outside, the rain coming down in thick sheets, but the darkness beyond seemed to pulse with a different kind of menace. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She grabbed a nearby wooden pitchfork, clutching it tightly in her trembling hands. "Please don't let it be back," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the wind. Aurora stood rigid, her eyes locked on the doorway, her tail swishing nervously. For several agonizing moments, there was nothing but the sound of the storm. Then, faint but unmistakable, came a low growl, barely audible over the rain. Sarah's blood ran cold. The predator hadn't gone far after all. It was out there, circling, waiting for the right moment. She glanced at Aurora, whose ears were pinned back in sharp focus. "We've come too far for this," Sarah said under her breath, gripping the pitchfork tighter. She moved to close the barn door, but deep down, she knew the night was far from over. The barn fell silent, save for the sound of the rain hammering against the roof. Sarah stood motionless, clutching the pitchfork so tightly her knuckles turned white. Aurora stood beside her, the mare's entire body rigid, ears pinned flat against her head. The foal, still lying on the bed of straw, let out a weak whimper, the sound almost drowned out by the storm. But Sarah's focus was on the open barn door, where the faint growl had come moments before. It was out there, waiting. Another flash of lightning lit up the valley for an instant, and in that brief moment, Sarah saw it. A pair of glowing eyes, low to the ground, staring back at her from the darkness just beyond the doorway. The mountain lion hadn't given up. It was hungry, desperate, and determined. Sarah's heart pounded as the predator stepped closer, its lean, muscular frame moving with quiet precision. "No," she whispered, positioning herself between the foal and the open door. Aurora let out a fierce neigh, pawing at the ground with such force that the sound echoed through the barn. The lion hesitated, its golden eyes flicking between Sarah and Aurora. For a moment, it seemed to reconsider, its tail lashing back and forth as if weighing its chances. But then it crouched low, muscles tensing as it prepared to pounce. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She raised the pitchfork, her hands trembling, but her resolve was firm. "Stay back!" she shouted, her voice breaking through the storm. Aurora moved forward, standing directly in front of Sarah and the foal. The mare let out a loud, piercing whinny that reverberated like a battle cry. The mountain lion leaped, its claws extended toward Aurora. The mare reared back on her hind legs, striking out with her powerful hooves. The clash was brutal and chaotic. Aurora's hooves slammed into the lion's side, and the predator let out a furious snarl. It swiped at Aurora, but the mare dodged, her movements quick and precise. Sarah watched in stunned terror as the two animals fought, the air filled with the sounds of hooves, claws, and guttural growls. Sarah knew she had to act. Gathering every ounce of courage, she rushed forward with the pitchfork raised high. "Get away!" she screamed, jabbing the weapon toward the lion. The predator turned, startled by the sudden attack, and stumbled back slightly. Aurora seized the opportunity, rearing up again and bringing her hooves down with all her strength. The lion yelped in pain and scrambled backward, its body low to the ground as it retreated toward the open door. Another flash of lightning illuminated its retreating form, its golden coat vanishing into the storm. For several moments, Sarah didn't move, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Aurora stood tall, her body still tense but no longer trembling. Sarah dropped the pitchfork and sank to her knees beside the foal, brushing her fingers through its damp fur. "It's over," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. The foal let out a faint, soft sound, as if it too felt the weight of the danger lifting. Aurora turned to Sarah, her dark eyes meeting hers for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement of what they had just survived. Together, they had fought for this fragile life, and together, they had won. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of courage and survival. Join us, and let's celebrate the strength and bond between humans and animals.